Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
A few announcements before we begin. Sunday flowers to celebrate our return to church, to celebrate someone, to celebrate something in honor of anything you wish are welcome for the altar. As you can see, it's a beautiful addition on a Sunday morning. Please call Christine in the church office if you would like to sign up for a Sunday to donate flowers for the service. We are still masking, or we're back to masking in the sanctuary when we're standing or not socially distanced. And of course, we're kind of exempt for when we're standing up here speaking, but then we have to put it right back on. Sad but true, but better than going to Zoom. Almost anything on earth is better than going to Zoom, as you say. A few upcoming events. This coming week concludes the Socks and Underwear Drive. Kate Rusecki and her committee have really made a tremendous effort and actually had a tremendous outcome. And apparently this will be announced in the Gloucester Times this coming week.
May I let you know the results? We're still counting, but as of now, we have over 300 sets of underwear and over 500 pairs of socks from baby
On June 11th, we're doing a garden share, meaning sort of a garden tour. June 11th will be Pat Cronin and Susie Fields' gardens. The details are in the newsletter that you receive on Fridays. It'll be in the afternoon, 2 to 4 o'clock. This will be continuing throughout the summer. If you have a garden you'd like to share, I think, Pat Cronin know. But again, check the newsletter. That has all the details. June 22nd is the new date for our book club reading, Anxious People, by Frederick Bachman, a wonderful book, really a great read. And it'll be 10 o'clock in the morning. We're hoping that it will be here, but I don't know what will be happening with meetings in the church because COVID levels in Gloucester are high, I'm sorry to say. So we'll have to see what's happening, I think, on the 22nd before we determine where that book club meeting can be. And then July 8th is our first Music on the Meeting House concert with the John Baboyan Ensemble. It's going to benefit Pathways for Children, Foods from Causeway. It's a great way to kick off the summer. That's on July 8th. Two further things, two friends in need. Both Bill Jackson and Linda Kidder would be very happy, would love, really need to hear from people. Phone calls are fine. Cards are great. And both of them is complicated, making the contact, so it's in the newsletter. You have to go to the newsletter to get phone numbers and instructions on getting those materials to them. But they are both ill and both in need of our community spirit at this time. So now let's open our hearts and turn our minds to worship.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Nazarian, and it's my pleasure to be the guest this morning as a member of this church, and as Reverend Janet is away on sabbatical until August, we have a very interesting roster of people who are either ministers or lay people who will be presenting to you until she comes back. And so they have a very varied menu coming up through the summer. Pat Johnson, who heads the Music and Liturgy Committee, has helped arrange a lot of this. So it's really set up amazingly well, and hope that you'll come and enjoy it. I want to greet you who are here, and also everyone who is online via YouTube to our service this morning, which is dedicated to Gay Pride Month. We are a welcoming congregation here, and we welcome people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We repeat that every Sunday, not just on Gay Pride, but all through the year. And people have been worshiping in this building since 1806. We're very proud of this meeting house, which was built for the first Universalist congregation in America. And we are a family going all the way back to 1779, when the congregation was first gathered and established itself as a place in which all people are welcome, in which people were working for social justice, for equality of all people. And that thread runs all the way through to the present day. And so that's what makes us a family. Family comes in many different forms. And some of you may recall the very hilarious movie called The Birdcage, or the earlier version of it that was called La Cage aux Folles. And at the end of the movie, there's a wonderful song called We Are Family. And the lyrics go something like, we are family, I've got all my sisters and me, get up everybody and dance. And so we're going to just hear a few strums of that as I head back up to the pulpit. Thank you, Steve. It put us in the mood. This is also the beginning of June and the beginning of summer. And so our first hymn this morning is number 42 in the Gray Hymnal, but not just yet. Oh, all right. Sorry, Pat. I got ahead of you. And he got ahead of you. I don't know. We're just so anxious to have fun. Please, go ahead.
I really wanted to call you to worship, so that's why I decided to actually interrupt and get myself in here. This is a wonderful call to worship. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence. The bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day.
Thank you, Pat. Now we will sing Morning So Fair to See, which is number 42 in your Gray Hymnal. And we are blessed this morning in having Susan Nicholson to play the hymns for us. So if the choir will come on up, Susan is going to play just a very short intro, so get ready to start right in on the hymn.
Sky.
Thank you, Susan. And now, in the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we will light our chalice. Please join me in the affirmation, which is printed in your program, or most of you know by heart. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. And since the start of the war in Ukraine, we have been lighting a candle for peace. We hope that the day may come when we may not have to do this, but until peace comes to Ukraine, we will do this every Sunday. Thank you, Pat. Many of you who are members here know that Reverend Janet oftentimes will do a wisdom moment. It's a very short message that speaks to something either historical or something that was particularly meaningful. It goes to the meaning of this day. This morning I have a story for you about when I was in college at Trinity in Hartford, Connecticut. This was around 1969, 1970. And as many of you may recall, colleges and universities during that late Vietnam War period were going through a lot of convolutions. And I was coming out as a gay person, and Trinity did not have a gay liberation group on campus. So some of us were thinking about what we might do. Our sister organization, Yale, down the road, slightly larger, had already created one, but there was nothing like that in Hartford. So in what was then an alternative newspaper, I found just a little notice in saying that there was a meeting of some people who were interested in gay liberation. And I didn't know where this place was, but it turned out to be kind of a scary walk off of campus on a dark night. And when I found the address, there was just one bare bulb in the porch of this house. And so I was, I had some trepidation going in. I went inside and realized that this was a 3-story house. So I found my way very reluctantly up this 3-flight of stairs and found a door just slightly ajar. It's about as scary as it could be. I hadn't thought about it, however, but I was wearing one of my favorite shirts, which looked a little bit like a military shirt. It had little, not epaulets, but just a little bit of button and a little bit of cloth on either side. So I very slowly pushed open the door and saw all these people looking at me in absolute horror, thinking that I was the police. Well, that was the beginning. Well, they welcomed me once they realized I was a college student. And what ensued was a very interesting discussion about what was going on. And the whole question about sexual identity and what that meant to us was the center of that discussion. And at one point, one person who was leader of the group stood up and said, and these were his exact words, "I am not a homosexual." And then he let us all sort of take in a deep breath. And he said, "I am a homosexual human being." And that was the beginning of a whole new way of looking at this subject for me. It was a revelation, and ever since I have been very cautious about the question of labels and identities, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Thank you, Steve. We have a responsive reading. It's number 576 in the gray hymnal. It's called A Litany of Restoration. If, recognizing the interdependence of all life, we strive to build community, family, the strength we gather will be our salvation. If you are black and I am white, if you are female and I am male, it will not matter. If you are older and I am younger, it will not matter. If you are progressive and I am conservative, it will not matter. If you are straight and I am gay, it will not matter. If you are Christian and I am Jewish, it will not matter. If we join spirits as brothers and sisters, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened, and that does matter. In this spirit, we build community and move toward restoration.
Thank you, Pat. This morning, our pastoral prayer, which will be followed by a period of silent meditation, is from Thich Nhat Hanh, and he writes, "Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become holy ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being common to us all and to all living things. Evoking the presence of the great compassion, let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. With humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us, let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen." Thank you, Steve, for that beautiful rendition. Our reading this morning is taken from the New Testament, from the book of Acts 8:26 through 40. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert place." And he rose and went. And there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all of her treasure. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning, seated in his chariot, and he was reading from the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join this chariot." So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I understand unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now the passage of the scripture he was reading was this: "Like a sheep he was led to the slaughter, like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opens not his mouth. And in his humiliation justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." And the eunuch said to Philip, "About whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this? About himself or about someone else?" Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with this scripture, told him of the good news about Jesus. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What prevents me from being baptized?" And Philip answers him, "If you believe with all your heart, you may." And the eunuch commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down to the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more, and went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he passed through, he preached the gospel to all the towns until he came to Caesarea.
We gather in community and in family each week to seek meaning in our daily lives, to pause to worship the highest that we know. Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us. A community, a family of memory and hope, for we are the stewards of what has been handed down to us by those who have gone long before. To support this church and all of its ministries, this morning's offering will now be gratefully received. Thank you for your generosity.
again, Steve. Beautiful music. About a month ago, a controversial statute was passed in Florida and signed by Governor DeSantis that has been widely called the Don't Say Gay law in the media. It criminalizes and prohibits the teaching or even mentioning about non-heterosexual relationships to early grade school children, among other things. The justification given for this law is that teaching children about alternate sexual orientations and gender identities amounts to corrupting their young minds and creating, heaven forbid, tolerance for relationships among adults that don't conform to the so-called norms of married heterosexual couples. Viewed as part of the red meat for political culture wars, this was a highly successful sales job based upon fear, misinformation, and the misuse of religion. It totally ignores the fact that, like it or not, kids are very aware that many of their peers have a single parent or two parents of the same gender, plus relatives and friends who don't fit the necessarily average heterosexual conservative-based standards as applied to only the ones as being acceptable around them. It is easy to dismiss such laws as a cynical appeal to an important subgroup of the current Republican Party, but we all know that labels have power. Remember how kids would say sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt? In response to nasty attempts at labeling other kids? Sadly, it is not true. As we know from the high suicide rate among young people who identify as gay or transgender, words, especially in this time of social media explosion, indeed can hurt us to the core and literally can kill. We are a label-obsessed society. By giving a name to something, our scientific approach to knowledge is satisfied that we not only know what it is, but that on some level that we are in control of it. That need to control data is very strong, especially with the huge amounts of information that is directed at us every day through our cell phones, tablets, computers, and televisions. Many years ago, I was reminded of this because I have a grandniece who is on the Asperger's spectrum. She had dozens of models of prehistoric animals displayed in her bedroom, and she knew the correct paleontology and Latin name for each one. But when placed in a room with competing voices chatting or television in the background, she was helplessly incapacitated to interact and would become easily frustrated and angry. Those environments that she could not control became threatening, even if the people in them were well-meaning family or friends. Similarly, we are often bewildered, fearful, and upset when there is too much input from news or social media to digest. So people naturally fall back upon labels and patterns of attitudes towards others that are either familiar or make them feel part of a tribe that they feel they can trust. Politicians have become very skillful in identifying and exploiting that fear through the use of names that seem to make their side into the good people versus the bad people. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, some of the worst words that could be used as weapons, especially among boys in schools, were queer, homo, or fag. By the late 1960s, with the explosion of youth culture, the anti-war movement, the growing acceptance in the mainstream of feminism, and the drive for social justice with the Black Power movement, many negative labels got turned into points of pride. One of those involved the emergence of the word gay as a positive expression about liberation from being put down for a person's right to openly live out the natural sexual attraction for a person of the same sex, whether between two women or two men. Although there had been many names, polite or nasty, given to this group over the millennia, this was a label one could embrace and gradually learn to celebrate openly. But it is still an identifying label. The music of our service today is by composers about whom we are confident of their personal stories to have identified as gay, even if they didn't know the meaning of the word at the time. Samuel Barber is a good example. His brother, Clarence Barber, was the head of the music department at my alma mater, Trinity College, and many of us who were students there in the 70s discovered that both highly talented brothers were gay, even if by necessity they were in the closet with regard to their careers. Samuel's Adagio for Strings is beloved by many because of its heartrending tenderness, an expression of sadness that goes to our core. And it was not accidentally chosen for the movie Platoon as a result. Aside from Katie Lang, who is a contemporary woman who self-identifies as gay or lesbian, other composers like Saint-Saëns would not have known the term. Which brings us to the issue I mentioned in the wisdom moment. So many of the labels that we use to identify people should be adjectives because they describe only one aspect of the whole person. But we so often fall into the habit of using these terms as nouns. Examples abound, and especially as nouns, they are often used in a negative manner, such as, she is an opportunist, he is a creep, or they are bigots. If we truly recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the first principle of Unitarian Universalism, we need to listen to ourselves and how we use language when labeling others. So when in that dark room in Hartford so long ago, to be the participant in a discussion, the man declared that he was not a homosexual, but a homosexual human being, he was pointing to the dehumanizing potential for the way our society uses classification and labels to devalue a class of people and to undermine the full potential of a person based only upon one aspect of their personalities. At the time, it seemed really good to have the new name gay, with at least a more positive and happy connotation in our language. But by now, it is clear that many kids use the term gay in a way like they once used the term fag, with the same hurtful results. And such terminology begins early in grade school, which is why it is so important to teach history and tolerance at an early age, exactly the opposite of the new Florida law's intention, which is also why it is so insidious and was fought by companies like Disney, who understand that children are smart and that teaching inclusion through stories and role models is an essential part of their socialization. Since this is Gay Pride Sunday, one might be curious about where the term gay came from. The word's original meaning meant something to the effect of joyful, carefree, or full of mirth, and even bright and showy. However, in the early parts of the 17th century, the word began to become associated with immorality. Later, according to the Oxford Dictionary, the meaning of the word had changed to mean addicted to pleasures or dissipations, often euphemistically of a loose and immoral life. Leading forward into the 19th century, the word gay could sometimes refer to a woman who was a prostitute and a gay man who slept with a lot of women, ironically enough. Also at this time, the phrase gay it actually meant to have sex. Around the 1920s and 30s, the word started to have a new meaning. In terms of the sexual meaning of the word gay man, it no longer just meant a man who had sex with a lot of women. It now started to refer to men who had sex with other men. And yet, there was also another word, gay cat, which at this time meant homosexual young person. By 1955, the word gay now officially acquired the definition that we think of it today. Gay men themselves seem to have been behind this thrust for a new definition, and they felt, as still many do, that the term homosexual is too clinical and it sounds like a disorder. As such, it was common in the gay community to refer one another as gay decades before this was commonly used among the public. At this time, homosexual women were often referred to as lesbians, not gay, although women could still be gay if they were considered loose women, and that meaning of the word had not yet disappeared. Today, it's quite interchangeable and up to the person how they want to identify. Since then, that term gay has driven out all the other definitions that have floated through time, and of course has become very common in our culture. How ironic, however, this is when we consider that in our culture, growing up as a gay person is often anything but joyful and carefree. Religious organizations of many denominations and backgrounds continue to portray gay men and women as inherently sinful and guilty of abhorrent behaviors unacceptable to God. Kids who suspect they may be transgendered are particularly under attack, and there is even a Texas law that makes parents criminals if they help their kids with medical or psychological care. Most young people who think they may be gay are terrified of the reactions of their families and peer group. They often internalize self-loathing, and as a result, Bible teachings such as love thy neighbor as thyself ring especially hollow when you do not actually like the person that you may be. This is one of the more remarkable societal features of feeling an outcast in one's formative years. Assuming that you survive the emotional tumult, it leads to a person to question all cultural systems or religions that leave you outside of acceptable norms. Fortunately, questioning truth is central to Unitarian Universalism. And this is clearly one reason why so many people who identify as gay, straight, or something in between have found a safe and supportive home in our churches. Our sex education program called Our Whole Lives, which goes back many decades, emphasizes that sexuality is a gift, that sexual expression and gender identities encompass a wide spectrum and are not necessarily either or, and that who you love is a matter of choice in which one preference is simply not better than the other. For the Universalists, the first step in this direction is the belief that all of creation emanates from a loving God who seeks for us to return to our source. Although our bodies are mortal and may be viewed as dust to dust, our spirits come from light and return to light. For the Unitarians, the starting point is often that creation is good and that human beings of all kinds possess that inherent goodness. Either way, it is a message that so many young people need to hear, especially in today's ugly and divisive political landscape that often seeks to use religion as a cultural weapon. Of course, we can't be blind to the phrases in Leviticus and the Hebrew Bible that use damning terms like abomination, but it is all about context. First of all, survival in tribal societies depends upon numbers. Having large families was essential to ensure survival. One could simply not have Joshua and Moshe or Ruth and Naomi riding off into the sunset as happy couples. They needed men and women to produce children in quantity. One must also take into account that the other Levitican abominations were things like eating shellfish or even handling the skin of a pig. Not even the most rabid fundamentalist Christian of today would deny themselves a shrimp cocktail or a game of football. The New Testament, based upon the life and teachings of Jesus, is more subtle. We quickly get to the original definition of words in Hebrew or Greek versus their present-day translations by scholars. Or things like the examination of the Apostle Paul, who started as a Jewish legal zealot tormenting Christians, and who may very well have been at war with his own sexuality, complaining about a thorn in his side. A dear friend of mine who had wrestled with these issues due to his Catholic upbringing taught me to focus on two actual acts by Jesus that might point to a deeper truth. One of them concerns the Roman centurion in Luke 7:1-10, who risks his position by publicly asking Jesus to save his ailing young man. In some English translations, the young man is described as his servant or slave. But scholars note that no Roman, especially not a centurion, would have risked his entire life for such a low-ranked person. The most accurate translation for the word pais indicates that this was actually his lover. Jesus was willing to go into the centurion's house to heal this young man, but the centurion stopped him and said, "Sir, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed." And Jesus says to the crowd, and it marvels, "Not even in Israel have I found such faith." And then he says to the centurion, "Go, be it done for you as you have believed." And his boyfriend was healed at that very moment. Homosexual relationships and even marriages were acceptable in some parts of Roman culture, unlike in Hebrew societies. So these scholars insist that this story shows the compassion Jesus demonstrated by telling the centurion that his lover was healed through faith. And it goes far past eating with tax collectors in Jesus' radicalism. Another is found in the story in the death and resurrection of Lazarus in John chapter 11, 1 through 44. If you recall, Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary, had sent word that he was dying and that they were angry with Jesus for coming 4 days after his death, saying that if he had only come sooner, that their brother would not have died. But in the drama that unfolds, Jesus calls out to Lazarus and he awakes from death. This is the miracle above all others that shocked the Jewish authorities and caused such a frenzy as the news spread prior to Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem. What is sometimes lost in the story, however, is how Jesus wept when he came to the tomb. And the Jews note in the text, "Behold, how he loved him." And of course, the story is to foreshadow Jesus' own resurrection in the Bible story. Some believe that Lazarus of Bethany was the beloved disciple of Jesus, and maybe even his lover. Scholars theorize that Lazarus was also the unnamed one whom Jesus loved, also known as the beloved disciple, and is referenced at least 5 times in the Gospel of John. Nobody else is mentioned in this regard. Lazarus and his sisters also formed a non-traditional family at a time when there was huge pressure for heterosexual marriage. All 3 of them were close to Jesus, which makes the story so full of meaning. Perhaps the most intriguing New Testament story of inclusion, however, rather than of rejection and condemnation, comes in the Acts of the Apostles from our reading today. Here again, there is a lot of hidden meaning. The Ethiopian who Philip baptizes is probably not only a man of color, but one with very dark skin, and from a very different culture, and he is a eunuch in the service to Candace, the queen. One has to know the context to fully understand what this means. Although the Ethiopians from Nubia had a patriarchal society with a succession of kings, women had a much more equal standing with men. When a king died, his wife would rule as queen until a male heir was of age. Thus, there was actually a lineage of many queens, and they were called Kandake, which is where the name Candace comes from. And they were known as powerful rulers and fierce warriors. In fact, Alexander the Great is said to have avoided veering south into Nubia in his quest for conquering the world because he did not want to risk being defeated by a woman. The culture was also known for the practice of male and female prostitution, including persons of the same sex, in Candace's royal temples. So the eunuch was about as far removed from a devout, observant Jew as culturally and ethnically possible. And yet here is he is reading the Hebrew scriptures and not understanding what he is reading. And when he asks if he can be baptized, Philip answers him if you believe with all your heart. This is perhaps the ultimate expression of inclusion to be found in the New Testament, one that many segregationists and fundamentalists might prefer to ignore. But it is undeniable that the good news Philip preached is for the entire world, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual identity, or gender expression. And it's right there in Acts. Of course, we are not told what happens when the eunuch returns to the palace of Candace the Queen, and that sure would make interesting reading. Now let us leave ancient times. I recently was fortunate to watch a TED Talk about the discoveries about the human genomic sequence, how there are certain ones that correspond to a person's sexual orientation, and how this relates to evolution. Studies of the human genomic sequence are recent, and much is yet to be learned. But in early 2021, several studies indicate that there is a remarkable correspondence between a group of genomes and gay sexual identification. The presenter noted with regret that there are so far much fewer studies about women, but this is coming along. One thing is already clear. There is unambiguous and mounting evidence that sexual orientation is not purely a choice. The statistical occurrence of people who identify as gay with this genomic sequence is simply too large. So for the first time, science is corroborating what gay men and women have been saying forever. Our attractions are as natural to us as those of people who identify as heterosexual or straight. Of course, this flies in the face of some religious dogma that prefers to simply see gay behavior as bad or unnatural. To some of us, perhaps 10% of the population, it is natural as the color of our eyes or the sun rising every morning. But the presenter asked a follow-up question that was really intriguing to me. Since gay people don't typically reproduce and raise kids, why hasn't evolution simply done away with them over time? Statistically speaking, we should have died out long ago. The hypothesis is that there must be some evolutionary benefit to having gay women and men as part of successful societies. So, there are now 3 answers which have started to emerge from the data and from anthropology. First, there appears to be a strong correlation to the occurrence of gay men or women with the genomic sequence, with children who are born 3rd or 4th or later in a family. The occurrence apparently is much less likely in the firstborn and remains much lower for secondborn. The hypothesis is that a natural process is at work that favors generational reproduction in the early children of a family, and thus its chance to grow and survive. Second, there is also a strong correlation to the occurrence of the gay genomic sequence with children whose mothers experience some kind of trauma during early in their pregnancy. This could be in the form of food deprivation or an anxiety reaction to circumstances around them. The hypothesis is that another natural process is at work that might help to ensure that rather than leaving the family unit, this member may serve a different function in looking after the siblings or their offspring, or perhaps even in looking after the parents in their old age. Third, and related to the second, there is now quite a lot of evidence that as aunts and uncles to the children of their siblings, that gay women and men often serve an extremely useful and evolutionary significant purpose in helping to ensure the success of the family without raising children of their own. In fact, in some cultures in the South Pacific, there is a recognized role for a male family member who dresses in clothing more like his female counterparts, and whose role is highly respected as a teacher and a facilitator within the culture. Perhaps in a less dramatic way, we can easily observe that gay aunts and uncles in our culture often can serve as go-to people when the parental relationships are under stress, or when a younger family member needs a nudge in a creative or educational direction from somebody other than a parent. There are other examples from our recent history that are not necessarily happy or easy to accept, but still telling about them tells us about important roles that gay men and women have played in the progress of our culture. One significant one is Bayard Rustin. He was an African American raised in Pennsylvania, where his family was involved in civil rights. And he moved to Harlem, where he worked as a nightclub and stage singer and continued to work for civil rights in a group called the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And he actually helped to organize a freedom ride in 1947 to challenge, with civil disobedience, racial segregation. 1947. He was the key person behind Martin Luther King's leadership and helped to organize the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to strengthen King's position. Rustin became a leading strategist for the civil rights movement from 1955 to 1968. And without him, many of the things that occurred would not have been possible. Of course, he was kept in the background because members of the black church in particular did not want to see a homosexual man visible in the front ranks. But he served later in his life as a public spokesperson for the gay movement. And he died in 1987 on a humanitarian mission in Haiti. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously by President Barack Obama in 2013. Whatever science ultimately concludes, I think we have already come to that place in America where it is unthinkable to return to a time when simply loving the person of your choice could land you in jail. And we are never going back. Of course, the recent rightward direction of the Supreme Court and the willingness of so many Americans to follow demagogues using hate and fear for political advantage, like the governor of Florida, has put us on high alert. We can never, ever take our freedoms for granted. We must always be vigilant to safeguard the freedom and rights of all, especially those who are most vulnerable to discrimination. Our recognition of the interconnected web of existence demands nothing less from us. As we celebrate Gay Pride Month, as we should with parades and festivities, we also have to acknowledge the responsibility that we bear to sustain human rights and counteract bigotry and discrimination everywhere and anywhere that it appears to be taking hold. So since there are some people who would try to prevent us from saying the word gay to our kids in a positive light, I wonder how they would feel if we passed a law that flipped the tables and was named Don't Say Straight. You would not be allowed to discuss loving relationships between men and women or role models with school children. It's obviously ridiculous, isn't it? This illuminates the double standard practiced by a narrow-minded group of people who seek to use our laws to enforce their cultural and religious views on everyone else. Some of us are old enough to remember Anita Bryant, the orange juice huckster who tried to smear gay people while smiling in the Florida sunshine. And most of us sadly lost many wonderful friends and family members, nearly a whole generation, to AIDS. And we will never forget those dark days when fundamentalists like to call it the gay plague. So let's resolve to continue to work forcefully and confidently for inclusion and for freedom, because we are part of a wonderfully diverse human family. So may it be. And I'm sorry for going on a little longer than usual. Would you all join me in repeating the unison prayer, which is number 524 in the gray hymnal? And this is by Starhawk. Earth, Mother cells in your body and dance together. You are the grain and the loaf that sustains us each day. And as you are patient with our struggles to learn, so shall we be patient with ourselves and each other. We are radiant light and sacred dark, the balance. You are the embrace that hardens and the freedom beyond fear. Within you we are born, we grow, live, and die. You bring us around the circle to rebirth. Within us you dance forever. And now, if you'll join me in singing our closing hymn, The Sweet June Days, which is number 65 in your hymnal. Susan will play a short intro, and if the choir would come up, we will celebrate this beautiful June day. Our closing words are from the former minister of this church, Hosea Ballou, who came after John Murray. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. And now we will extinguish our chalice with the words that are in your program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service is done. Our service begins.